My first involvement was 1945, after the war, in the occupation. I was helping a Japanese family. We became friends, this schoolboy myself. And when his brother, who was a master sergeant in the Japanese Army, was discharged, he came to he met me at the house, and he started thanking me, for helping the family. And then as we became friends, I asked him about judo, jiu-jitsu. I didn't know the difference. All I remember is Peter Lorre as Mr. Moto in the movie, see. And next thing I know, I saw the ceiling. I was down on my back, and the whole family was looking at me, little faces all around me. And he says, "That?" I says, "Yeah, that's judo." So that was my first exposure. And then a little bit later, I was in the military government in 1946 in Chiba Prefecture. And I helped start a judo club. But unfortunately, I barely got into it when I was discharged. My time came up and I was shipped home. And then I didn't get into judo until I returned to Japan in 1950. It was, I think, late 51 or early 52. I went to the Kodokan. Actually, I was looking for something Japanese to do. I was a young guy and having a good time in Japan. I said, I want to do something Japanese. And I was talking to my tailor. We always had our clothes made by a tailor. You don't go to the store, you're in the house drinking tea, and he measures you and all that. And he said, I told him I wanted to do something Japanese. He says, you should do judo. And I was, I had learned, I had done wrestling and boxing, so I was already a scrapper. And I was a street fighter when I was a kid in South Philly. So I was always exposed to some kind of fighting when I was. But, and so I went down to the Kodokan, and I saw, it was late, and it was just this old teacher throwing this young student around. And I said, oh, heck, I can do that, I thought. And so I signed up, and that was, that's how I got started in judo. And then I found myself working out 5 and 6 days a week. It was like eating peanuts. You eat one, you can't stop. And there were great teachers. It was awesome at the Kodokan. I could practice with all Japan champions or these old teachers that were remarkable. And some of them, fortunately, had some English, could speak English. But my Japanese was coming along fairly good, and I could express myself. And judo has its own Japanese language, its terms. And that was sort of how I got started. And then there were some of the great teachers. Then it was Kobayashi who became we wrote the book Sport of Judo, and Kobayashi had a fair knowledge of English, and we became very close, almost like brothers. And he taught me a lot. He was a good Uchimata man, almost all around. And we would travel around Japan. I was sort of like his pet monkey, if you will, the foreigner, because it was kind of new then, having foreigners in judo and traveling back into remote areas. And people would say, what does it eat? They met me. He'd say, he eats Japanese food. Really? And they were afraid if I took a bath, I'd use soap in her bathtubs. You're not supposed to do that. And we did a lot of goodwill tournaments, fighting, and we bring some other foreigners around. But Kobayashi was sort of my main teacher. And like say, we were almost like brothers. We were about 2 years apart in age. I was already a college graduate then. I'm in my 20s. And he was the main one. But then there were others that we met all the time, like Kotani, who became a 10th degree. And Kotani had won the bronze medal in the Olympics in the 1930s because he was a great mat man. And he was great. He could just explain things away. He was really good, but he was very strong on the basics. With the basics, you can do anything. In fact, he told a friend of mine, if you did Nagi no Kata, the forms of kata, every day for 2 years, you'd be all Japan champion. Just stick with the basics, stop this rigidity and stuff. And Kotani was remarkable, especially on the mat. He could just play with you. All you can do is move your eyeballs when you were with him.
The ankle propping throw, and this is just a kazushi, stepping around and pulling the opponent up on his front foot. This is harai goshi, steps back, pulls in tight, and sweeps. This is a modified Keisagatami, and he's going to turn it into a makura, a pillow Keisagatami. Comes over the arm, reaches through, catches the opponent's collar, sits through, catches his own thigh, and snugs up on the hold. This is the sliding collar choke, okurieri. And this is sort of a half Nelson type. It's a half-sided choke. This film was shot in 1951. It's Kotani Sensei working out the Kodokan, Harai Goshi. He's going to do it again. Steps across, spins through, beautiful. Now he's going to do an Ippon Seoinage.
Probably the most analytical person I ever ran into was Takagaki. And we wrote the book called Techniques of Judo. And Takagaki, I found out, was kind of the father of judo for Asia, for other countries. India, Nepal, Afghanistan, and perhaps China. And he had, as a young person, became a student in the United States. He went to college for, I think, 2 years in Vancouver, Canada. And he traveled around, and he was a small person, but the Japanese community would have him challenge big wrestlers and stuff, like Mitsu Maeda. He was like that type of person, all right? Very skillful, but very powerful judo if he needed it. I mean, he could really lay you out. And in China, he was sponsored by a person named, I think it's Tagore, who was he had won the Nobel Prize for poetry, I think about 1913. But he liked the idea of judo, this concept of Bushido for India now that it was liberated from England. And so while he was there, he wrote a book, a text on judo. It was never published. It was never even typed. It was all handwritten. And after I had done sport of judo in Japan, he came to me and wanted me to co-author this book, and he gave me this manuscript. By that time, I was a third-degree black belt, much more knowledgeable. With sport of judo, I was only a shodan, first-degree black belt, when we wrote that. So I was really a basic, down to that level. Now I understood a lot more. And I just marveled at this text, because every technique, he would show you both sides, the yin and the yang. When the opponent does this, he's strong here, he's weak there, therefore you can use this technique against him. Then he would turn it around. When someone does this throw to you, they're strong here, but they're weak here, and here's how you can counter it. So everything he did, he had both sides. And I never heard such great explanations and knowledge, the real feeling of it. And so we did the sport of judo, techniques of judo. And later, I've produced some film on him. I had photographed him, and some of that now is in some of my classic judo series.
A counter foot sweep. It's a bami gaishi against a back foot. Deashi barai, the forward foot. It's a side tsurikomiyashi, stepping around, catching the ankle. Nidan, deashi, 1, 2. Kouchi. Kouchi is a person steps forward. There he goes again. Now here's Kouchi with a one-sided grip. Jerk the opponent forward, grab his leg, and split him. Here's Kouchi against a back leg, lifting the opponent up. Here's Ouchi Kouchi, fast combination. Ouchi Kouchi.
But one story he told me that I thought was wonderful. One day I said, "Sensei, talk to me about kiai." You know, in martial arts we have this, yeah, it's kiai. And sometimes you hear some teachers say, more kiai. But I notice a lot of good people never use kiai, except maybe just as they threw. Yesha, like that, you know, but it wasn't all this, yeah, stuff, you know. Okay. Well, he gets a smile on his face. He had these bushy eyebrows, and they start bouncing around. I know it's coming, like a joke. And he points to his wife, who was a little short, dumpy Japanese lady with a beautiful little face. He said, near the end of the war, the government wanted the women to help defend Japan against the Americans. And so they got his wife and other ladies in kimono, and they tied their sleeves up and pulled the kimono between their legs like a pantaloon. and they gave him these spears. And they went out to this field, and at one end were dummies, and the dummies are the Americans. And then the sensei was saying, okay, yeah. So all these old ladies are charging across the field, screaming, and they got about halfway and they collapsed. He says, that's what I think about Kiai, keep your mouth shut. But he had to give this, and that was Takagaki. It seemed like whenever I was with him, I was smiling and laughing. Something came out. But he was remarkable in his observations. Once I asked him how Ishibashi, who was incredible judo competitor, he was captain of Meiji University, and we used to take bets as to how many seconds it would take for him to throw somebody in competition. So he said, well, if you notice, he only throws when the opponent's right leg is back. He didn't tell me why. I learned later on to understand the theory of that. So one day at the Kodokan, Ishibashi shows up. And I went up to him and had a practice with him. And I made it a point to keep my right leg forward all the time. He moved me around, he did this and anything he did, but he couldn't get me to stand with my right leg back. He never threw me. And I felt really good about that. And I wasn't trying to be defensive. I couldn't get him, of course, but he was incredible. But Ishibashi didn't throw me. Later on, I learned about the concept of the judo triangle and a few little things about balance. Because in those days when you're young and fighting, you're not fighting with theory, you're fighting with a lot of power and speed and some of your favorite things. And as you become a teacher later, you begin to understand more about the theory, I think, after you retire from competition. There was Mifune Sensei. He was always on a mat. He was incredible. And he had this way of moving around in circles and swinging up. When someone went to throw him, he would put a leg between their legs and just block it, and then swing around underneath them and throw. There's a great old film out on Mifune. In fact, just recently, I was at a teacher's clinic, and two teachers came from Japan, and they were teaching a new kata on counter throws. And it came from Mifune, and so I brought my laptop and showed him a movie of Mifune doing that. And this thing's called Ura no Kata. It isn't a formal kata yet, but it will be out. And Mifune, I never really worked with him directly. He was there in front of us doing his thing. And then there was a new dojo in the mountains in Japan, and I was captain of the foreigner team, and we're having a goodwill tour. But Mifune did a demonstration, and I have some footage on him and some of my stuff. And when I fought the captain of their team, who was number 3 in their prefecture, it was a tough fight. When I finished, I actually had white foam all around my mouth. I never experienced this before. It was all white, fuzzy stuff all around my mouth. And we ended up in a draw. He dumped me once, but I got out of it. I dumped him. We were back and forth. So Mifune sent an emissary over to the hotel I was at with Kobayashi and asked me to be his special student. But unfortunately, I was working every day and training hard. And I couldn't see any time I could do that. I thought it was an honor, and it actually was a mistake. I probably should have made that point to do it. But I never became a special student of Mifune. But he liked me so much. And he'd seen me at the Kodokan. I was, you know, these teachers come there, but we see each other. We see these people, how they work out. And so I guess I had a good reputation, because just recently in Japan, Osawa Sensei told Okada Sensei, who was a teacher, that I was a very strong player, you know. But, you know, you don't see yourself. And then I was a young guy.
This is at a Numazu at a new dojo. He's explaining Izutsu no Kata, the forms of 5, and other katas. He's with Kyoshi Kobayashi. This is the form that looks like an airplane, where they turn around with their arms spread apart. He says if you don't continue, it dies. So you keep going, drop down. There's the one like the wave across his chest. Now this one is where two opponents come at each other. He says if you don't get out of the way, you're in trouble. So here's what he does. Drops down, the opponent goes over him. Now he's going to explain how to move with an opponent, counter throws, picking up someone's weakness. This is where Kobayashi has more or less attempted to do a uki otoshi, a hand technique. So Mifune Sensei is explaining his weak points. He can kick his leg out, Osoto, from the back like he just did, or he can step forward and throw him over his back leg. There he goes. He shows the action. Now Kobayashi's trying a one-arm shoulder throw. So Mifune explains, since his force is forward, you can swing around the front and throw him with a stemiwaza. Now here, if Kobayashi tries an obi otoshi, picking him up, as he grabs the belt, grab him and do a leg sweep. That's an oguruma. Now they're moving around. As the opponent stops, he does Tomoe Nage. Moving around some more. Kobayashi tries to throw. He swings around the back. Tries again. That was a great oguruma there. Kobayashi tries a kouchi, tries another throw. Mifune just bounces. They move around some more. Mifune bounces off of him. Mifune drops under him quickly for a Kata Guruma. This is Mifune at the World's Judo Championship doing Itsutsu no Kata. That was the wave form. Now the two opponents rise. They spread their arms. And they come at each other.
Kawakami was also like a legend. He wasn't well known like Oda, who was more of a showman and things like that. I mean, not Oda, but I mean Mifune. But Kawakami was one of the close proteges of Kano and the top guys in Judo. He came to Kodokan probably in the early 1900s. He was a strong boy from, I think, Mito, the city of Mito in Ibaraki Prefecture. Was good with Bojutsu, the staff, sumo, very strong. You know, college, high school type sumo. These guys were really muscular. And a Shodan, a teacher, came from the Kodokan to his village. And he really got taken away with judo. And then these jiu-jitsu masters came to do a demonstration on jiu-jitsu with the hakamas and all that. And they practiced with Kawakami. Kawakami threw them. So they invited him to come to Tokyo and be with them. And so he studied jiu-jitsu, and then he did judo with the Kodokan. And I picked up this last May a bunch of photographs, old photographs the family gave me, with Kano and Kawakami. And all these big these photographs, all these distinguished judo people, and Kawakami was only like 2 people away from Kano. I really saw how close he was to him. I've got some great photographs of that. In fact, I donated the originals to the Kodokan, to the library, the Kano library. They flipped out when they saw him. The curator there never saw any of these things of Kano, but Kawakami was in all of those. And Kawakami was, he taught me to work really controlled, keep a low center of gravity on that mat work. Mat work was his big thing. And I found out later that most tournaments were what they call kohaku, where the 2 people fight winner's days. But by win, you have to get an ippon. There was no decisions. Decision tournaments come about when you need a champion, say for Tokyo or for All Japan, and so you eliminate. You know, the first 2 fight, winner goes up, and they do that. That's an elimination tournament. And since you have to have a winner with every match so you can move up to the next bracket, they would have decisions, the judgment if there was a draw. And a draw was anything but an ippon. So even if you had a half a point, they still didn't necessarily have to give it to you, although generally that was strong enough to make the decision. But it wasn't automatic. Like today we use what's called the International Judo Federation rules. and they have what they call kokas and yukos, different levels. And you can use these to make an automatic decision if it's on the scoreboard. You don't have to ask for a decision from the judges. So they've eliminated, for the most part, the use of the flags for judgment, because they have all these other ways for penalties and things. And we didn't have penalties. We had penalties. They were kind of the same, except they were rarely used, because the judo guys were good sportsmen. Most penalties are if you're doing something against the spirit of judo or one of the prohibited acts. So I never got to see a prohibitive act. I wouldn't know one if I fell over it. I know it's in the book, but we just don't practice them. And as far as being overly defensive and stuff, no one was defensive. So they didn't use those penalties in the old days. But most of them were, like I say, what I was trying to get to is that the champions in Japan, championships, they'd have the East and West Championship. That was the big one. Tokyo was probably the East. I don't know, that area at the top. I don't know, one's West, but you split Japan in half, like North and South in the United States. And when you look at the lineup, they were a who's who. Mifune, Oda, Kawakami, all the greats were there. And they fought each other from the weakest to the strongest. And Oda was captain. He was a little guy, like at 130. He was captain of the East and West team. And sometime maybe Mifune. So I saw some of the old scrolls, which shows the lines. There's a group here, and who fought who, and who got more wins, and that type of thing. In the 5 years that I fought in Japan, trained and fought, I was only in one tournament that was a decision. Every one I did was, if you didn't get a point, both guys sat down. You're both out. See, so it was a different mentality, I guess, than they have today with these IJF rules.
Now let's have fun on the mat with the sensei. Here he's demonstrating Bojitsu. Footwork, handwork, keeps a stick in front of him. Now the two of us are going to do a Bojitsu exercise routine. This was really a lot of fun. There he is demonstrating his Ippon Seoi Nage, one-arm shoulder throw. This is a Seoi Hanigoshi. Very unusual. He's the only person I've ever seen do that. This is Seoi Otoshi, dropping through, locking both arms. Now we do Sasai Tsudekomiyashi, the propping ankle throw. This is Deiashi Barai, the advanced foot sweep. This is Tai Otoshi. See how he sets him up first and shoots his leg across. That was very good. This is Ashi Guruma. He sets him up, shoots across the knee, and throws sideways. This is a spinning, another sort of an Ashi Guruma thing, or a Haragoshi. This is Hanigoshi with a Maki Komi. Ouchigari on the leg to take the person down, goes into a hold, locks the arm as the opponent turns towards him. In the hold, the opponent turns away the other way, catches his arm, grabs his gi, puts his leg over the top, and diagonally does a Jujigatami. This really hurts the shoulder. The opponent turns towards him, and he chokes him by stepping over the top. This is another cross choke. Creates a trap. The opponent turns towards him, pushes the gi open, grabs the back, turns sideways, puts his leg up, and chokes the opponent. This is a sliding collar choke from the front. Here he locks the arm with his head, armbar from a standing position. Another armbar from the standing position. There's a choke at the bottom, push the head through. It's a kata hajime. There's a hadaka jime when someone attacks you from the front. There's a turnover, catches the arm, steps over the side, pulls the arm back for an arm bar, then figure fours his legs for choke, for sankaku jime.
One of the most important things that happened to me was my experience with Ishikawa. Now, Ishikawa came to me to help write his book. I mean, I'm not a writer, but what happened was I had done the sport of judo. I was just turned Shodan, first Greek black belt, and I wanted a book on judo. So I went to Mr. Tuttle, who had his offices near the Kodokan, who was a publisher, And he says, why don't you write a book? I said, me write a book? But I was pretty good in photography. So I convinced Kobayashi, who was the youngest teacher in the Kodokan. And he says, I can't write a book, I'm the youngest teacher. Well, I embarrassed him, and we finally did this book. Well, once the book came out, in Japan, once you get a reputation, you're stuck with it. And so I became a famous book writer on judo. And so Takagaki came to me, and I wrote his book, Techniques. Now Ishikawa comes to me, and he just wanted me to do the writings under the photographs and things like that. Well, we got to be very close friends. We'd sit there just drinking tea or eating noodles, and we'd do our thing. And then he would tell me stories about his life and how he became a champion and some of his thoughts technically. And one of the things was that for every hour on the mat, you should spend 2 hours by yourself. Well, I couldn't quite do that, but I started doing 1 hour every night before I went to bed. I got this expander from the PX, but it was with bungee cords. And I put 2 eye hooks in the wall, found a stud, and pull. And I found out with that, everything, my toes, my hips, everything had to go together. Otherwise, sensei bungee the bungee cord would win. And I became very powerful. My pull, I could actually pull people right out of their socks. I could, boom, just go. Everything opened. It was like teaching my muscles how to work, from my toes, gripping the mat, the muscles of my thighs, everything, my hip. And then I would get on the mat, on my carpet, and I would do newaza things, feet over the head, and this and that. And when I went to bed at night, finally I would strangle my pillow a few times, okay? So I really became, but it was a big difference in me. One of the other things he taught me was to put my mind in my elbows. See, in judo we grip with our hands, so we actually put our mind in our hands. We think with our hands. He says, no, think with your elbows. Push with your elbows, pull from your elbows. And then he said, create an invisible vector from my elbow to the other person's center of gravity. Well, it turns out, in order for a person to move, they actually have to move from here. Of course, they could just hands and feet, but that's not a real movement. And I might catch you with something. But when they move, it really goes from there. So what happens is, by having the vector there, anytime they move, it's like hitting the high spot. You stop them. It's like in mat work, we do this sometimes where your opponent's laying down and you lay across them and don't actually grip them. And let them try to get up and you shift, just like being on a surfboard. I'm doing the same thing standing. Of course, I'd already learned about relaxing. I'd gone through that phase, and where my eyes go, I look through a person, I don't look at any particular part. And so this was a big thing. I became almost unthrowable, but all of a sudden I understood. I became a part of the other person without consciously thinking. I became part of them. You know, whatever they did, I had it. And I found that actually years later I became a negotiator of major contracts with the government. And you sit in a room with all these other people. I could actually, like Ishikawa, I put my mind, I was leaning on the other person. I could become part of them, and I understood the way they were thinking in these negotiations. I became very successful that way. But anyways, so this thing from Ishikawa with the vector became very important. And I was able to, no matter who came out there, I could take them. I could pick up where they were and throw. Of course, you had to have some technique. And the other thing was he felt gripping, the pocket grip was very important. That is catching here. When you grip, say, a sleeve, this is very good, but there's a lot of material. So once you start to pull, you start stretching. At that moment, it's only a fraction of a second, your opponent feels that, and so you counter-react. But if I hold here, I move a quarter inch, you go a quarter inch. The reason this is very important, you'll see a lot of players, they'll attack, they come in and they get counter-thrown. They can't feel. They have to know the person's going. It's stupid, really, to put your back into somebody. Now, that was another thing Ishikawa taught me, which is kind of interesting. He said, if your opponent can turn in for a throw and his back is to you, he actually has the advantage at that point. So what you do is, there I'm holding, say, my right hand or left lapel. As that person turns in, I pull the person into me. So their whole side comes into me here. They don't turn. I kill it. And from there, I can squat, hook their leg, lift them up, turn them over, counter throw, do other things. And that was very, very, very powerful. When I was on a trip to South Africa, I was giving a clinic, and I was teaching this, and none of the students could do it. And then I realized what they were doing. They were holding the lapel here. So as the opponent turned in and they pulled, they weren't pulling the opponent because all this material stretching. So I had everybody grip here, and as soon as I did it, the whole class, there must have been 40 people there, instantly everybody did it right. Because now they had the leverage, see. So this was a huge step. And I was fighting in the Sandan, third-degree black belt thing. I had a lot of success. I just could control people. It changed me completely. Also mentally. I was always a happy player. Kind of a clown. My teachers used to say, "Sharp son, fight!" Well, with Ishikawa talking to me about it, I don't know why I changed. And I would sort of come out, and in my mind, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'd bow and I'd look and I'd sort of say, "I'll kill you, son." Something like that in my mind, just to turn myself on. Yeah, I would not say that. And for some reason, it's a fight. And then I could really go in. And I realized that by having this, boom, boom, I'm going to get you, the other person, I could feel the psychological effect. So the mind was important. You sort of tell the other person, me Tarzan, you Jane. I'm the 800-pound gorilla. And go, try, do something. And then when they try something and you kill it right away, they lose. They just sort of, they don't feel the confidence of what they're doing.
Following are selected clips from a 1954 film on Ishikawa's techniques. Here he's doing Ippon Seoinage. Watch how his hips drive backwards. In, hooks, and he goes backwards. Tai Otoshi. Drops real low, pulls hard. His right hand pushes from the heel of the hand towards the jaw. Tsurikomigoshi. His right elbow goes under the armpit. Then he pulls the arm tight across his body. There's a back shot of it. Now Ouchigari. Comes in, hooks the leg. The heel of his right hand drives the shoulder back.
And Ishikawa was sort of my finishing thing. Now, years later, I don't know, I met him in Virginia Beach. We're older people now. He had lost a son who had committed suicide, unfortunately. And he was telling me about how he wants to go back to Japan and be buried with his son. And I said, "Sensei, you've done so much for people. Like for me, you doubled my power. You made my heart twice as big." And he looks at me and says, "I understand, but let me tell you something. If you ever use that power for evil, you will lose it." And I looked around and I'm like, I don't believe this conversation. But it's cute. That's sort of a follow-on many years later, he's saying that to the sensei.